I used to believe loyalty would bring security. But in a company where power was built on lies, loyalty only made me a target for exploitation. He didn't know I'd been documenting everything, every broken promise, every stolen idea, every client relationship he claimed as his own. And when it came time to say goodbye, I made sure he heard every word along with the client list he thought belonged to him. This is how I turned 15 years of silence into the loudest exit he'd ever witness. My name is Emily Hartman, and for 7 years, I've been drowning in the fluorescent hell of Silver Point Consulting's third-floor office in Riverside Falls. It's Tuesday, 8:47 p.m., and I'm still here, staring at spreadsheets that blur together while the rest of the city has gone home to their families. The coffee maker gurgles its last bitter drops the fourth pot today, and I can hear Richard Calloway's voice booming from his corner office, probably on another call with Tokyo, pretending he understands the Asian markets better than he actually does. Riverside Falls isn't New York or Chicago. It's one of those mid-tier industrial cities where financial services firms sprouted like weeds after manufacturing died, promising prosperity but delivering servitude. Silver Point occupies a gleaming 10-story building that looks impressive from the outside but feels like a pressure cooker from within. We're the kind of firm that handles wealth management for people who aren't quite rich enough for the big banks to care about doctors, small business owners, the occasional tech entrepreneur who cashed out early. I'm sitting in conference room B, the one with the broken air conditioning that facilities never quite gets around to fixing. My laptop screen reflects my exhausted face, hollow eyes, hair pulled back in a bun that started neat this morning, but now looks like I've been through a windstorm. Around me, scattered papers document another one of Richard's urgent projects that absolutely had to be done by tomorrow morning, even though he's had the information for 3 weeks. The door swings open without a knock. Typical Richard. He stands there in his $3,000 suit that can't hide the gut he's developed from too many client dinners and not enough actual work. His face is flushed, probably from the scotch he keeps in his office drawer, thinking nobody knows about it. Hartman, where are we on the Morrison account? He doesn't say hello, doesn't acknowledge it's nearly 9 at night, doesn't care that I've been here since 6 a.m. Final review stage, I reply, keeping my voice neutral. I've restructured their portfolio to reduce risk exposure while maintaining the 7% return target they requested. He grunts, scanning the papers I slide across the table. I watch him squint at my analysis, pretending to understand the complex derivative strategy I've developed. He'll present this to the Morrisons tomorrow as his own work, just like he did with the Patterson account, the Chen portfolio, and dozen others before them. Needs more. Punch, he finally says, tossing the papers back. Clients don't want to hear about risk mitigation. They want to hear about wealth multiplication. Sexy it up. Sexy it up. 7 years of financial expertise, a master's degree from Northwestern, and he wants me to sexy it up like we're selling used cars instead of managing people's life savings. I'll revise it, I say, pulling the papers back toward me. But this time, something's different. This time, I'm not just taking notes on his feedback. I'm documenting everything the timestamp. His exact words. The fact that he's asking me to misrepresent risk to clients. My phone, tucked discreetly under my portfolio folder, is recording everything. Good. Have it ready by 7. The Morrisons are coming in at 8:30. He turns to leave, then pauses at the door. And Emily. That idea you pitched about expanding into cryptocurrency consulting, I ran it by the board. They loved it. We're moving forward next quarter. My idea. The proposal I spent 2 months developing, complete with market analysis and implementation strategy. The one he told me was too risky and ahead of its time when I presented it to him 3 weeks ago. Congratulations, I managed to say, my fingers gripping the pen so tightly my knuckles turn white. He doesn't catch the sarcasm. He never does. Richard Calloway built his career on the backs of people like me. People desperate enough to believe that hard work and loyalty would eventually pay off. People from working-class backgrounds who couldn't afford to walk away from a steady paycheck. People who mistook exploitation for opportunity. But as he walks out, leaving me alone again in this suffocating conference room, I'm not the same Emily who walked in here 7 years ago, fresh out of grad school with dreams of making partner by 35. That Emily is dead, killed by 1,000 small betrayals and one moment of crystalline clarity that's coming soon. I open my laptop and start typing. But it's not the Morrison presentation I'm working on. It's something else entirely. A list, names, phone numbers, email addresses, contract details. The real power in this company doesn't sit in Richard's corner office. It sits in the relationships, the trust, the years of late nights I've spent actually caring about our clients' futures while Richard was out playing golf. He thinks he owns Silver Point Consulting. He's about to learn that he only owns the nameplate on the door. Growing up in the south side of Riverside Falls, I learned early that poverty wasn't just about empty bank accounts, it was about empty promises. My mother cleaned offices in buildings like this one, coming home at midnight with swollen feet and minimum wage. My father worked construction until his back gave out, then drank himself to death, trying to forget he couldn't provide for his family anymore. I was 15 when I promised myself I'd never end up like them. Northwestern University was my escape route. 4 years of undergraduate study on scholarships and student loans, waiting tables at night, tutoring rich kids who couldn't be bothered to learn calculus on their own. Then the MBA program, where I met people like Richard Calloway, guest speakers who talked about bootstrapping and grinding as if they'd ever done either. I was 26, naive, and desperate to believe that the American dream was still achievable for someone like me. Richard hired me straight out of grad school. I remember that first interview, how he leaned back in his leather chair and said, "Emily, I see myself in you. That hunger, that drive, stick with me and you'll be running your own division by 35. I actually believed him. God, I was so fucking stupid. The first year, I worked 18-hour days without complaint. I brought in 3 major accounts through cold calling and networking at every conference I could attend. Richard praised me publicly, called me his rising star. Behind closed doors, he'd pat my shoulder and say, "Just a little longer, Emily. Partnership track takes time." The second year, I developed a new risk assessment model that saved our clients an average of 12% on their tax liabilities. The financial press picked it up. Richard's name was on the article as the lead developer. When I confronted him, he said, "Emily, we're a team. My success is your success. Don't be selfish." By year 3, I'd stopped counting the stolen ideas. The Henderson account I'd cultivated for 6 months, Richard swooped in for the final meeting and took credit. The algorithmic trading strategy that earned us $2.3 million in commissions. Suddenly, it was his brainchild. Each time, the same promises. Your time is coming. Be patient. Loyalty pays off. But the moment that changed everything happened 6 months ago. We were in the middle of a presentation to the Yamamoto Group, a Japanese investment firm looking to expand into the Midwest. I'd spent 3 months learning basic Japanese, studying their business culture, building a presentation that spoke directly to their values. Richard hadn't even read the briefing materials. Halfway through my presentation, I made a minor error, transposed 2 numbers on a projected earnings slide. It was easily correctable, wouldn't have affected the overall strategy. But Richard stood up in front of 8 potential clients and said, "I apologize for my assistant's incompetence. Emily, why don't you go get us some coffee while I salvage this presentation?" Assistant. After 7 years, a master's degree, and millions in revenue I'd generated, he called me his assistant. I walked out of that room, but I didn't get coffee. I went to the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back wasn't my mother, but she was heading there exhausted, undervalued, disposable. That's when I understood Richard didn't see potential in me. He saw someone desperate enough to exploit, someone who couldn't afford to quit, someone whose ambition he could feed on like a parasite. The Yamamoto Group didn't sign with us. They told Richard privately that they were concerned about the company culture after witnessing how he treated his team. He blamed me for the lost account. Of course, said my emotional reaction had made the firm look unprofessional. That night, I went home to my one-bedroom apartment, the same one I'd moved into 7 years ago. Because every raise I'd gotten had gone toward paying off student loans or helping my mother with her medical bills. I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of wine and made a decision. If loyalty was a currency, I'd been spending it in the wrong store. I started documenting everything, every email where Richard claimed my work, every meeting where he promised advancement that never came, every client interaction where he undermined me. But more importantly, I started building something else: relationships. Real ones. With the clients who called me directly when they had problems, who sent me holiday cards addressed to me personally, who trusted me with their children's college funds and their retirement dreams. Richard thought he was grooming me to be his perpetual workhorse. What he was actually doing was training his replacement. He just didn't know it yet. The fury that had been simmering for 7 years crystallized into something harder, sharper. Not hot anger that burns out quickly, but the cold kind that can wait, plan, and execute with precision. Richard Calloway had taught me everything about this business, including the most important lesson in the end. It's not about who has the corner office. It's about who the clients trust when their futures are on the line. The transformation began at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday. I sat cross-legged on my living room floor, laptop balanced on a coffee table I'd bought from Goodwill, surrounded by boxes of printed emails and documents. The apartment was dark except for the screen's blue glow, and I'd become an archaeologist of my own exploitation, digging through 7 years of digital burial grounds. Every email Richard had sent taking credit for my work, forwarded to my personal account, and backed up on 3 different cloud services. The Morrison portfolio optimization that earned the firm $400,000 in fees. I had the original files, time-stamped weeks before Richard's breakthrough presentation to the board. The Patterson account recovery strategy that saved a $50 million relationship. My Slack messages to colleagues discussing the approach, dated 2 months before Richard's heroic intervention. But documentation was just defense. I needed offense. I created a spreadsheet encrypted, password protected, hidden in a folder labeled Personal Recipes on my cloud drive. Column A, client name. Column B, personal details I'd gathered over years of actually listening to them. Column C, their real concerns about Silver Point whispered to me during those late-night crisis calls Richard never took. Column D, their contract renewal dates. Mr. Morrison's daughter had gotten into Yale. I'd helped her with her economics essay. Mrs. Patterson's husband was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's. I'd spent 3 hours restructuring their portfolio to account for future medical costs. The Hendersons trusted me to manage their autistic son's special needs trust. These weren't just business relationships Richard had claimed. They were human connections he'd never bothered to make. I started arriving at the office even earlier, staying even later, but now with purpose. While Richard slept off his scotch, I was in the server room at 5 a.m., using my legitimate access to download client contact histories. Legal. Technically, yes. I was a senior financial advisor with authorized database access. Ethical. Richard had torched that bridge years ago. The security guard, Marcus, started bringing me coffee during those early morning hours. "You're gonna burn yourself out, Miss Emily," he'd say. I'd smile and tell him I was just dedicated to my clients. I didn't mention I was also photographing every physical document in Richard's office during his long lunches, using the key he'd given me for urgent situations. 3 months into my preparation, I made my first move. I started scheduling routine check-ins with our top 20 clients. Nothing suspicious, just Emily being her thorough self. But during those meetings, planted seeds. "I'm so glad you're happy with the portfolio performance, Mr. Yamada. You know, I've been thinking about starting a more personalized boutique service, something that could give clients like you more individual attention. Hypothetically speaking, of course. Mrs. Patterson, I'm honored you trust me with these concerns. You have my personal cell if you ever need anything, regardless of where I'm working. Mr. Henderson, I've been developing some innovative strategies that might benefit your son's trust. They're a bit too unconventional for Silverpoint's current structure, but maybe someday. The responses were subtle but clear: raised eyebrows, knowing nods. If you ever do start that boutique firm, Emily, be sure to let us know. Meanwhile, I watched Richard grow fat and comfortable on his throne of lies. He'd started taking 3-hour lunches, delegating everything to me while he networked at his country club. He'd even stopped pretending to review my work before presenting it as his own. His signature became rubber-stamped approval on strategies he couldn't explain if his life depended on it. I built a shadow network within the company too. Janet from compliance, who Richard had passed over for promotion 5 times. David from IT, whose wife Richard had drunkenly hit on at the Christmas party. Sarah from HR, who had a folder of complaints about Richard that mysteriously never reached the board. They all knew what I was doing. Not the details, but the direction. And they were ready. The client list became my masterpiece, not just names and numbers, but a psychological profile of every major account. Mr. Morrison's fear of outliving his money after watching his father die in a state nursing home. The Yamaguchi's desire to fund their grandchildren's education without enabling laziness. Mrs. Patterson's quiet dream of funding a Parkinson's Research Foundation. These were the keys to kingdoms Richard didn't even know existed. Late one night, as I sat organizing my evidence, I found an email from 3 years ago. Richard, forwarding my comprehensive market analysis to the board with a note. Attached is Emily's work, as usual. I've had to completely revise it to meet our standards. The attachment was my original document, unchanged except for his name added as primary author. I printed that email and framed it, not for nostalgia, but as fuel. Every morning, I looked at it while drinking my coffee, reminding myself why this wasn't revenge, it was justice. Richard had taught me the game, shown me how power worked in this industry. Now I was going to show him what happened when you taught someone too well. The foundation was set. 7 years of relationships, 3 months of documentation, and a client list worth $500 million in managed assets. Richard thought he was a king. He was about to learn he'd been living in a castle made of sand, and I was the tide coming in. The first crack in my facade appeared on a Monday morning in March. I'd stopped laughing at Richard's jokes, stopped volunteering for his pet projects, stopped staying late just to appear dedicated. Instead, I worked with surgical precision, arriving at 7 a.m., leaving at 6 p.m., unless I had actual client work. The change was subtle, but in an ecosystem built on exploitation, even small rebellions create ripples. "You feeling all right, Hartman?" Richard asked one afternoon, finding me packing up at 5:45 p.m. "Not like you to clock out with the secretaries." "Just maintaining work-life balance," I replied, not looking up from my bag. "Read an article about burnout prevention. Thought I'd try being more efficient with my time." He laughed, that condescending chuckle that used to make me feel small. "Efficiency is for people who lack ambition. Emily, I thought you wanted to make partner." "Of course," I said, meeting his eyes with a steady gaze that made him shift slightly. "But I've been thinking about what partnership really means. The equity, the autonomy, the actual decision-making power, not just the promise of it." Something flickered across his face, not quite concern, but a primitive recognition that the dynamic had shifted. The gazelle wasn't running anymore, and the lion didn't know what to do with prey that stood its ground. My colleagues noticed too. Janet from compliance cornered me in the break room, voice low. "You're different lately, calmer. It's making Richard nervous." "Good," I said, stirring my coffee. "Nervous people make mistakes." She glanced around, then leaned closer. "Whatever you're planning, I didn't see anything." She paused. "But if you need someone to not see anything specific, let me know." The exit strategy crystallized in my mind like frost on glass, beautiful, intricate, and sharp enough to cut. I started using phrases in meetings, testing them like weapons. "When I evaluate my next career move," or, "in my experience building client relationships that transcend corporate structures." Richard would tighten his jaw. But what could he say? That I wasn't allowed to have ambitions beyond being his workhorse. David from IT became my unknowing ally. Hey, Emily, just upgraded your laptop to the new security protocol. He mentioned casually one day. Better encryption for client data. Make sure everything stays protected even if you were to, say, leave the company. Not that you're leaving. He gave me a meaningful look. Just standard procedure. The most satisfying moment came during a partners meeting I was invited to as a senior advisor consultant, a made-up title that meant I did partner-level work without partner-level pay. Richard was pontificating about client retention strategies when board member Charles Worthington interrupted. Emily, what's your take on client loyalty in today's market? I smiled, the kind of smile I'd practiced in the mirror professional, but with an edge. Client loyalty isn't to firms anymore, Mr. Worthington. It's to individuals. They follow advisors who understand their lives, not their portfolios. The days of institutional loyalty are dead. Clients want someone who answers their calls at 10 p.m., who remembers their kids' names, who treats their money like it matters beyond commission rates. Interesting perspective, Charles mused, looking at Richard. How do we ensure that loyalty stays with Silver Point if our key advisors were to transition elsewhere? Richard's face flushed. Our non-compete agreements are ironclad. Non-competes don't prevent client choice. I interrupted, my voice steady. If a client decides to move their assets, that's their prerogative. The best retention strategy is treating your advisors well enough that they don't want to leave. I paused, letting the words hang. And treating them poorly enough guarantees they'll take those relationships with them when they go. The room went silent. Richard's knuckles were white against the conference table. Charles Worthington was trying not to smile. After the meeting, Richard cornered me in the hallway. What the fuck was that? Emily. The truth, I said simply. You wanted me to learn the business. Richard, I learned. You work for me. I work for Silver Point Consulting, I corrected. You're just middle management with a corner office, and we both know the clients call my cell phone, not yours. His face went from red to purple. You ungrateful little. Careful, I said quietly. Sarah from HR is right around the corner, and I believe she's been documenting behavior patterns for quite some time. Something about creating hostile work environments. He stepped back, and I saw it in his eyes fear. Not of me, exactly, but of what I represented. The help that had learned to read. The servant who'd mapped the castle. The tool that had developed its own edge. This isn't over, he said. No. I agreed, walking past him. It's just beginning. Oh. And Richard the Morrison meeting tomorrow, I'll be leading it. They specifically requested me. You're welcome to sit in, of course. Try not to look too confused when I discuss the derivative strategy. It would be embarrassing for both of us. That night, I updated my list. 17 of our top 20 clients had expressed interest in my hypothetical boutique firm. The company anniversary gala was in 3 weeks. The stage was set, the actors were in position, and the curtain was about to rise on Richard Calloway's final act. The unraveling started with Mrs. Patterson's call on a Tuesday afternoon. Richard was in his office, door open, when his assistant transferred the call to him. I could hear his booming voice from my desk. Patricia. How's the portfolio treating you? I've been monitoring it personally. A pause? His voice shifted. You want Emily well. I'm sure I can handle whatever. Another pause? Longer. I see. Yes, I'll transfer you. My phone rang. Mrs. Patterson's voice was warm but firm. Emily, dear, I wanted to discuss moving our assets into a more aggressive growth strategy. I only trust your judgment on this. When Richard answered, I almost hung up. I understand completely. Mrs. Patterson. Let's schedule a private consultation. Richard appeared at my desk seconds after I hung up. What are you playing at? I'm not playing anything. Mrs. Patterson requested me specifically. Should I have refused? He leaned over my desk, trying to intimidate. I know what you're doing. Working. Yes, Richard, that's literally what you pay me for. Though pay might be generous. Considering market rates for someone managing half your client base. The Hendersons called next. Then, Mr. Yamada. Each time, the same pattern, they'd refuse to discuss anything substantial with Richard, insisting on speaking with me. Richard's assistant, Donna, started transferring calls directly to me without asking him first. When he confronted her, she shrugged. They hang up if I say you'll take the call. What am I supposed to do? Richard retaliated by scheduling mandatory strategy sessions at 7 a.m., hoping to wear me down. I attended every one, armed with detailed reports that highlighted my contributions. I started using phrases like my client relationships and the portfolios I manage instead of the usual our and we. Each possessive pronoun was a small cut, bleeding his authority drop by drop. The real escalation came when Charles Worthington requested a meeting with me alone. Richard tried to insert himself, but Charles's assistant was clear. Mr. Worthington specifically requested only Ms. Hartman. The meeting was brief, but loaded with subtext. Charles sat back in his chair, studying me. Emily, there are rumors you're considering other opportunities. I'm always evaluating how to best serve my clients' interests, I replied carefully. And if those interests aligned with starting your own firm, hypothetically, I'd ensure every transition was legal, ethical, and in full compliance with my contractual obligations. He smiled. Of course, hypothetically, Silver Point invests in promising financial services startups, sometimes even those founded by former employees. Provided, of course, the departure is amicable. The message was clear. The board knew Richard was a liability, and they were offering me a way out that could benefit everyone except Richard. That afternoon, I sent Richard an email, CCing Charles Worthington. Richard, I wanted to formally thank you for the opportunity to lead tomorrow's presentation to the Morrison Group. As you know, this $50 million account renewal is crucial for our quarterly targets. I've attached my comprehensive strategy, which I'll be presenting. Your attendance is optional, as I understand you have a golf commitment with the club championship qualifying round. Richard stormed into my office. You CC'd Worthington. Transparency. Richard, you taught me that. Besides, shouldn't the board know who's really managing our largest accounts? You're crossing a line. No, I interrupted, standing up. I crossed that line 6 months ago when you humiliated me in front of the Yamamoto Group. Now I'm just walking toward my destination. And you're starting to realize it's not here. His face contorted with rage. You need me. Without my recommendation, you're nothing in this industry. I laughed, genuinely laughed. Richard, when was the last time a client asked for you by name? When did you last develop a strategy without my input? You're not my mentor, you're my middle management. And frankly, you're not even good at that. I'll destroy you. I'll call every firm in the city. With what credibility everyone knows I run your book. They're probably wondering why I haven't left sooner. I pulled out my phone, showing him an email. 3 headhunters contacted me this week alone. Turns out, the market values people who actually do the work. The tension in the office became palpable. Colleagues started choosing sides through subtle acts where they sat at lunch, who they CC'd on emails, whose meetings they prioritized. Richard felt it, the erosion of his kingdom, and it made him desperate. He started making mistakes, promising clients returns he couldn't deliver, taking credit for strategies he didn't understand. The Morrison presentation he tried to hijack. He couldn't answer basic questions about the risk metrics. I had to step in, professionally, saving the account while everyone watched him flounder. Sarah from HR started a file. Janet from compliance noticed irregularities. David from IT documented suspicious database queries from Richard's login checking which clients I'd been contacting. The anniversary gala was 10 days away. Richard sent out a company-wide email announcing he'd be presenting a major strategic initiative that would revolutionize Silver Point's future. He even hired a professional speechwriter. I smiled when I read it. He was building his own stage, under his own spotlight, with his own noose. All I had to do was kick the chair. That night, I sent 17 emails to my key clients. Simple, professional notes. I'm exploring new opportunities to serve you better. I'll have news to share soon. Your trust means everything to me. Within an hour, my phone buzzed with responses. Whatever you're planning, Emily, we're interested. Richard thought he was preparing for triumph. He was actually arranging his own funeral. The Riverside Falls Marriott Ballroom glittered with 15 years of supposed success. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light on 200 guest clients, employees, board members, and local press. Richard had outdone himself with the preparations, a jazz quartet, premium open bar, and a massive screen displaying Silver Point's growth charts. He stood near the stage, resplendent in a new tuxedo, practicing his speech cards while accepting congratulations for achievements he hadn't earned. I arrived deliberately late, wearing a black dress I'd bought specifically for this moment, professional but memorable, the kind of outfit people would remember when they told this story later. Several clients noticed me immediately, raising glasses in acknowledgement. Mrs. Patterson actually winked. Emily. Richard's voice boomed across the room. Our star analyst is here. The false warmth in his tone fooled no one who knew us. He was marking territory, reminding everyone of the hierarchy. Wouldn't miss it, Richard, I replied, accepting a champagne flute from a passing server. I hear you have a big announcement. The program began at 8 sharp. Charles Worthington gave opening remarks about Silver Point's journey, then introduced Richard as the driving force behind our client services division. Richard bounded onto stage like he owned it, which, in his mind, he did. 15 years ago, he began, I joined Silver Point with a vision to revolutionize wealth management through personal relationships and innovative strategies. The speechwriter had done their job well. Richard delivered lines about integrity, innovation, and dedication with practiced sincerity. Then came the slides, my strategies, my analyses, my client wins, all presented as the fruits of his leadership. The Morrison account save, the Patterson portfolio recovery, even the cryptocurrency consulting proposal I'd developed, each achievement paraded as evidence of his genius. I stood up. The movement was small, but in a room where everyone was seated and facing forward, it drew attention. Richard faltered mid-sentence, watching as I walked slowly toward the stage, my heels clicking against the marble floor in the sudden quiet. Excuse me, Richard, I said, my voice carrying without a microphone. I believe there's been an oversight in your presentation. Nervous laughter rippled through the audience. Richard's face flushed. Emily, we can discuss additions after. No, I think now is perfect. I turned to face the audience, many of whom were my clients. Since we're celebrating Silver Point's success, perhaps we should be accurate about who's responsible for it. Charles Worthington leaned forward in his seat. Several board members exchanged glances. For instance, I continued, pulling out my phone. The Morrison account strategy Richard just presented, I have here the original email thread where I developed it, dated 3 weeks before Richard's breakthrough. I looked at Mr. Morrison directly. Tom, you remember our late-night calls working through the derivative structure, don't you? Morrison stood up. I do, Emily. Every call, Richard wasn't on any of them. The room shifted, a collective intake of breath. Richard gripped the podium. This is highly inappropriate. Inappropriate? I laughed. Like claiming credit for the Patterson portfolio recovery when you didn't even know they were considering leaving until I'd already saved the account, Patricia. Would you like to share who called you at 11 p.m. when your husband's diagnosis came through? Mrs. Patterson's voice rang clear. That was you, Emily, only you. Richard tried to regain control. These are team efforts. Team, I pulled out a folder I'd been carrying. Then let's talk about team. Here's an email where you explicitly told the board that you had to completely revise my work to meet standards. Would you like me to show everyone the attachment? It's my original analysis, unchanged except for your name added as author. Murmurs grew louder. Someone from the press started recording on their phone. But the best part, I said, now standing directly in front of the stage, is your announcement tonight. This revolutionary initiative you're about to unveil. Let me guess it's the Asian market expansion strategy I presented to you 4 months ago. The one you called too ambitious before stealing it. Richard's mask finally cracked. You ungrateful bitch, I made you. No, I said calmly, as gasps echoed through the room. You exploited me. You built your career on my work, my relationships, my expertise. But here's what you never understood. Richard, the clients aren't yours. They never were. I turned to the audience. 17 of Silver Point's top 20 clients have already expressed interest in following me to my new firm. Because they know who's actually been managing their wealth, who answers their calls, who cares about their families and futures. You can't non-compete, Richard stammered. Doesn't prevent clients from choosing their advisor, Charles Worthington said, standing up. Ms. Hartman is correct. I looked back at Richard one last time. Your exit strategy was always about maintaining power through taking credit. My exit strategy. It's about taking what I've earned, the relationships, the trust, the future you tried to steal. The room erupted. Clients approached me. Employees whispered furiously. Board members converged on Charles Worthington. Richard stood frozen on stage, his revolutionary announcement forgotten, watching his kingdom dissolve. Oh, and Richard, I called back. That client list you thought was yours, check your email. I've sent you a detailed breakdown of every client relationship I've built and maintained. Consider it my resignation letter. Effective immediately. Richard's counterattack came swift and vicious. You think you can walk away? I'll sue you into bankruptcy, corporate theft, breach of fiduciary duty, violation of confidentiality agreements. Go ahead, I said, pulling out my phone and connecting it to the ballroom's AV system. David from IT had given me the access codes earlier. But first, let's discuss fraud. On the massive screen behind Richard, emails began appearing. His messages to clients promising impossible returns. Documentation of him billing clients for meetings that never happened. Most damning, a conversation where he explicitly instructed me to hide losses in the Yamamoto portfolio by shifting them to dormant accounts. That's taken out of context. Richard's voice cracked. Is this out of context? I clicked to the next slide. Security footage from the office. Richard removing client files on weekends. The same files that mysteriously disappeared when the SEC made inquiries last year. Marcus, our security guard, has been very helpful. Turns out he's been documenting irregularities for months, concerned about potential theft. Charles Worthington stood up. Richard, I think you should stop talking. But Richard, in his desperation, made his fatal error. She's nobody, a diversity hire from the wrong side of town who should be grateful I gave her a chance without me. She'd be cleaning offices like her mother. The room went silent. Even his few remaining allies stepped back. My mother, I said quietly. But the microphone carried every word. Worked 18-hour days to put me through school. She has more integrity in her arthritic fingers than you have in your entire body. And you're right, I am from the wrong side of town. That's why I recognize a con artist when I see one. Janet from compliance stood up. Mr. Worthington, I have documentation of 43 client complaints about Mr. Calloway that were never formally filed. I was instructed to handle them informally. I have recordings. Sarah from HR joined her. I have 7 sexual harassment complaints and 12 reports of creating a hostile work environment, all suppressed on Richard's orders. David from IT stepped forward. I have evidence of Mr. Calloway accessing the system under other employees' credentials to alter records. That's federal wire fraud. The board members were huddled in urgent conversation. Charles Worthington approached the stage. Richard, you're suspended effective immediately, pending investigation. Security will escort you out. This is a setup, Richard screamed, his face purple with rage. You're all in on it. This bitch orchestrated. No, I interrupted. You orchestrated this. Every stolen idea, every betrayed trust, every lie you told built the scaffolding for your own gallows. I just provided the rope. Two security guards appeared, not Marcus, but external contractors the board had apparently arranged. As they approached Richard, he made one last desperate play. The clients will never leave. They're contracted with Silver Point, not you. You'll be starting from nothing. Mr. Morrison stood up. Actually, Richard, our contracts are up for renewal next month. What a convenient coincidence. Mrs. Patterson added. Mine too. In fact, I believe 17 of us have renewal dates within the next 60 days. Almost like someone knew this was coming and advised us on optimal timing. The Hendersons, the Yamadas, the Jeffersons one by one. My clients stood, a silent vote of no confidence in Richard and Silver Point's leadership. Charles Worthington cleared his throat. Ms. Hartman, might you be interested in discussing that startup investment I mentioned? Silver Point Capital would be very interested in backing your new venture. Consider it. Severance for 7 years of undercompensation. I'll take the meeting, I said, then looked at Richard being escorted out. But I already have my severance. It's watching Richard finally face consequences. As Richard was led away, still screaming about lawsuits and revenge, I turned back to the audience. To those who want to continue working with me, I'll be in touch within the week. To my former colleagues who supported me, thank you. Your courage in speaking truth to power won't be forgotten. The press was typing furiously on their phones. By morning, this would be front-page news in the business section. Local financial advisor exposes years of fraud at anniversary gala. Richard's reputation wouldn't survive the night. I walked toward the exit, past the ruins of Richard's career, past the board members calculating damage control, past the clients already planning their transitions. At the door, I turned back one last time. Richard had broken free from security momentarily, his tuxedo disheveled, his face twisted with rage. You've destroyed everything 15 years of building this company. No, Richard, I called back. You built nothing. You were just a parasite feeding on other people's talent. And tonight, the host finally rejected you. The doors closed on his screaming. Outside, the October air was crisp and full of possibility. My phone was already buzzing with messages, clients, headhunters, journalists, and a text from Charles Worthington. Breakfast tomorrow, we have much to discuss. 7 years of subjugation, 6 months of planning, 1 night of execution. The king was dethroned. The castle was mine for the taking. And the client list, my client list, was already choosing their new advisor. The October sunset painted Riverside Falls in shades of amber and gold as I walked out of the Marriott. My heels clicked against the pavement, each step taking me further from 7 years of servitude and closer to something I'd almost forgotten: existed freedom. My phone vibrated constantly. 17 text messages from clients confirming they'd follow me anywhere. 3 voicemails from competing firms offering immediate partnerships. 1 email from the SEC requesting my assistance with their investigation into Silver Point's practices. But the message that made me stop walking was from my mother. Saw the news already. Your father would be proud. Come home. I made your favorite. I drove to the south side, to the small house where I'd learned that poverty wasn't destiny, just a starting point. My mother was waiting on the porch, still in her cleaning uniform from her shift at the hospital. When she hugged me, I finally let myself cry, not from sadness, but from the sheer release of carrying this weight for so long. You did it, baby, she whispered. You stood up to him. I destroyed him. Mom. No, she said, pulling back to look at me. He destroyed himself. You just held up the mirror. 3 weeks later, I signed the lease on a small office space downtown. Nothing fancy, just 3 rooms with good light and a view of the river. The nameplate on the door read simply, Hartman Financial Advisory. No grand promises, no corporate speak, just my name and what I did. Within a month, 19 of Silver Point's top 20 clients had transferred their portfolios to me. The 20th sent flowers with a note, "Would have joined you, but I'm Richard's brother-in-law. Family obligations. You understand." I hired Janet from compliance as my operations manager, David as my IT consultant, and Marcus, the security guard who'd believed in me, as my office manager. Sarah from HR started her own consulting firm, specializing in workplace harassment cases. Her first client was suing Silver Point. Richard's fall was complete and brutal. The SEC investigation revealed years of fraudulent billing, insider trading, and tax evasion. His assets were frozen, his licenses revoked. The last I heard, he was working as a junior sales associate at a car dealership in Indiana, using a different name. His wife had divorced him, taking what little remained after the lawsuits. But this isn't a story about Richard's destruction. It's about transformation, how exploitation can become education, how oppression can forge resilience, how the very skills used to suppress us can become the tools of our liberation. 6 months after that October night, I stood in my office watching the sunrise over Riverside Falls. My assistant knocked. Yes, I had an assistant now. A bright young woman from my old neighborhood who reminded me of myself 7 years ago. Except I paid her fairly and taught her everything without stealing credit. Emily. The Patterson meeting is in 30 minutes. Thanks, Maria. And remember, you're leading the presentation. I'll just be there for support. She smiled, nervous but excited. You really trust me with this? I trust you to be brilliant. Just don't trust anyone who promises you the world while paying you in pennies and stolen dreams. Charles Worthington's investment had come through not just money, but connections, credibility, and a board position at Silver Point after they cleaned house. I declined the board seat. I'd had enough of that world. My world was smaller now, but entirely mine. The clients thrived under personal attention. The Morrison portfolio grew 18% in the first quarter. Mrs. Patterson's husband's care was secured without touching their retirement. The Henderson Sons Trust was restructured to provide lifetime support while protecting the principal. These weren't just numbers on spreadsheets anymore. They were promises kept. Sometimes, late at night in my office, I'd look at that framed email Richard claiming credit for my work still hanging on my wall. Not as fuel anymore, but as a reminder. A reminder that power isn't given, it's taken. That loyalty to those who exploit you isn't virtue, it's voluntary victimhood. That the best revenge isn't destruction, it's success that makes their failure irrelevant. My phone rang. A new client, referred by Mrs. Patterson. As I picked up, I saw my reflection in the window, tired but satisfied, scarred but not broken, standing in an office built on truth rather than theft. Hartman Financial Advisory. Emily speaking. How can I help you build your future? The caller started explaining their situation, and I listened, really listened. The way Richard never had. Because that's what real power looks like, not standing on others' shoulders, but lifting them up to stand beside you. Richard had been right about one thing. I was nobody. Once. But nobody was exactly the right person to show everybody that the emperor had no clothes. And sometimes, the best exit strategy isn't just leaving. It's making sure that when you go, you take everything that matters with you, leaving behind only the hollow shell of what never really was. The sunset through my office window painted everything gold. And I smiled. Not the practiced smile of suppression, but the real thing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new clients, new opportunities. But tonight, I was exactly where I'd planned to be, on the other side of revenge, where success is the only response that matters. Thank you for listening to this story of workplace revenge and redemption. Where are you listening from today? I'd love to hear from listeners around the world. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever faced a toxic boss or workplace exploitation? How did you handle it? Your stories inspire our next episodes. Remember to hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest revenge stories.